My mother gave my business to her new husband. I made her regret it. The moment I realized I was about to change the world, I was wearing mismatched socks and hadn't slept in 36 hours. It works, I whispered, staring at my laptop screen where lines of code had finally aligned into something beautiful, something revolutionary. I looked around my dorm room. Empty pizza boxes, energy drink cans, and 3 whiteboards covered in algorithms, and started laughing. Maybe it was the sleep deprivation, but in that moment, I, Emma Caldwell, felt like I was standing at the edge of something monumental. My roommate Priya groaned from under her blankets. "Emma, it's 4 a.m. Either celebrate silently or buy me coffee tomorrow." "I'll buy you coffee for a year," I promised. The EduraTech prototype works. The AI actually responds to learning patterns. That was 3 years ago. Now, at 24, I was sitting in a glass-walled conference room watching venture capitalists fight over who got to invest more money in my company. My company. Sometimes I still couldn't believe it. So, with this new funding round, we're looking at a valuation of $75 million, said Marcus, my CFO. The investors nodded appreciatively, their eyes gleaming with the promise of future returns. Emma's breakthrough in adaptive learning algorithms has already transformed educational outcomes in over 300 schools nationwide. I smiled politely, but my mind was already racing ahead to the next phase: global expansion, new features, the research center I wanted to build. EduraTech wasn't just an educational platform, it was my vision for democratizing quality education. The AI analyzed each student's learning style, pace, and preferences, then adapted lessons accordingly. Kids who had been failing were suddenly thriving. Teachers who had been overwhelmed were finding joy in their work again. "We'll need to move quickly on this," I said, pulling everyone's attention back. "The back-end infrastructure needs to be overhauled before we can scale internationally. I've already written most of the code." But my phone buzzed. "Mom." Again. I silenced it for the 3rd time that day. After the meeting, as investors filed out with handshakes and promises, I finally checked my messages. "Emma, please call me. It's important. Richard and I want to take you to dinner tonight." "Good news." I sighed. Mom had been relentlessly cheerful about her new husband, determined to make us one big, happy family despite the fact that Richard Hale made my skin crawl. There was something calculated about his charm, something too perfect about his timing, swooping into my recently divorced mother's life, just as my company started making headlines. "Something wrong?" Marcus asked, gathering his papers. "Just family stuff." I forced a smile. My mom remarried 6 months ago. She's in that phase where she thinks if we all have enough dinners together, I'll suddenly see her husband as my new dad. "And you don't like him?" I hesitated. How to explain that Richard's business acumen, which Mom found so impressive, set off every alarm bell in my head. That when he talked about helping with EduraTech, it felt like a predator sizing up prey. "He's fine," I lied. "Just not my favorite person." Later that night, I sat across from them at Aurelia, the kind of upscale restaurant where the menus don't show prices. Mom looked happier than I'd seen her in years, her hand constantly finding Richard's as if to reassure herself he was real. At 52, Lisa Caldwell was still striking, with the same dark curls I'd inherited, though hers were now threaded with silver. "Congratulations on the funding round," Richard said, raising his wine glass. "Your mother says you're expanding to Europe next?" I nodded cautiously. "How did you know about the funding?" "We haven't made the announcement yet." He smiled, displaying perfect teeth. I keep my ear to the ground. Tech investment is a small world. "Richard has connections everywhere," Mom said proudly. "He's been mentoring startups for years." "Is that what you do?" I asked, realizing I still knew almost nothing about him despite their whirlwind 6-month courtship and sudden marriage. "Among other things, I have diverse business interests." His vague answer annoyed me, but before I could press further, he continued, "Actually, that's partly why we wanted to see you. I think I could be an asset to EduraTech." I nearly choked on my wine. "What?" "Emma," Mom leaned forward, eyes bright with excitement. "Richard has experience taking companies public. He knows how to scale businesses properly, how to talk to the right people. He could mentor you. I don't need a mentor. The words came out sharper than intended. I've built this company from nothing. We're doing fine. Of course you are, Richard said smoothly. But there's a difference between surviving and thriving. Between a good company and a great one. You're brilliant with technology, Emma, but business is about relationships, strategies, timing. Things I happen to excel at. Something in his tone, the barely concealed condescension, made me grip my fork tighter. I appreciate the offer, but… Just think about it, Mom interrupted. You're working yourself to death. You told me last week you haven't taken a day off in months. Richard could share some of that burden. I looked between them, my mother's hopeful expression and Richard's calculated smile, and felt suddenly trapped. Had this been their plan all along? Was this why Richard had pursued my mother? The paranoid thought flashed through my mind before I could stop it. I'll think about it, I said finally, the lie bitter on my tongue. Mom beamed. Richard nodded, satisfied, and raised his glass again. To family, he said, and to the future of Eduratech. As we clinked glasses, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted, that I'd just glimpsed some hidden agenda I couldn't quite decipher. But then Mom launched into wedding pictures I hadn't seen yet, and Richard asked intelligent questions about my AI algorithms, and I began to wonder if I was being unfair. Maybe he genuinely wanted to help. Maybe this was just what having a stepfather felt like. Awkward and intrusive, but ultimately well-intentioned. By the time we said goodnight, I'd almost convinced myself I was overreacting. Almost. 3 days later, when Mom called to say Richard had drawn up some simple agreements to formalize his advisory role, the alarms in my head returned full force. But I was in the middle of the biggest expansion in company history, sleeping on a cot in my office, and frankly, I didn't have the energy to fight on two fronts. Fine, I said, exhaustion winning out. I'll look at them when I have time. I didn't know then what those papers would cost me. I didn't know that simple agreements would be the beginning of the end. I didn't know that within months, the company I'd built from code and dreams would no longer be mine. I didn't know I was about to lose everything. 2 weeks passed in a blur of code and conference calls. I barely left the office, surviving on delivery food and the cot I'd set up in the corner. Eduratech was on the verge of something huge, a partnership with the Department of Education that would put our platform in schools across the country. Every waking moment was dedicated to making it perfect. That's why, when Mom showed up at my office with a stack of papers and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, I was in no state to be suspicious. Richard drafted these, she said, placing them on my desk. Just some formalities to make his advisory role official. He's already helped negotiate better terms with your European distributors. I looked up, genuinely surprised. He did what? Oh, he's been talking to them all week. Saved you nearly 15% on the contract. She beamed with pride. See? This is exactly why you need his expertise. I should have questioned how Richard had accessed our confidential business contacts. I should have asked who authorized him to negotiate on Eduratech's behalf. Instead, I rubbed my bleary eyes and thought, 15% was significant. Just sign here, Mom continued, flipping to the flagged pages. It's mostly standard mentor agreement stuff. Richard wants to make this official before he invests any more time. I should have legal look at these first, I said half-heartedly, already reaching for a pen. The Department of Education presentation was in 3 hours, and I still had debugging to do. Mom's hand touched mine. Emma, honey, do you think I'd let you sign anything that wasn't in your best interest? It's just paperwork. Richard is family now. That phrase, Richard is family now, had become her mantra, repeated so often it had lost all meaning. But in that moment, looking at my mother's familiar face, I made a fatal mistake. I trusted her. I skimmed the documents, noting phrases like advisory capacity and financial restructuring options, but the dense legal language blurred before my exhausted eyes. With each signature, I felt a growing sense of unease, but I pushed it aside. Mom wouldn't hurt me, and I had a company to run. There, I said, signing the final page. Now I really need to get back to work. Mom gathered the papers with unusual haste. You won't regret this. Richard says Eduratech is going to be bigger than anyone imagines. The way she said it, like she was reciting someone else's words, should have been another warning. But I was already turning back to my computer, mind racing with algorithms and presentation points. It was 4 weeks later when everything fell apart. I was in a meeting with our development team when Marcus burst in, face pale. Emma, you need to see this. Now. He handed me his tablet, opened to an email with the subject line, Notice of Change in Corporate Structure, Eduratech Incorporated. As I read, the room seemed to tilt sideways. The documents I'd signed, the ones Mom had brought, hadn't been a mentorship agreement. They'd been a complex set of share transfers, board restructuring authorizations, and management change approvals. Richard Hale was now majority shareholder and CEO of Eduratech. I was listed as founder and chief technology officer. This can't be legal, I whispered, but Marcus's expression told me otherwise. The paperwork is airtight. I've had 3 lawyers look at it in the last hour. He lowered his voice. Emma, he's already changed the bank account authorizations. He's calling an emergency board meeting at 2. The room emptied as I sat there, staring at nothing. How had I missed this? How had I not seen what was happening right in front of me? The answer was simple and devastating. I'd trusted my mother. When I finally managed to move, I drove straight to her house, the sprawling Tudor she now shared with Richard. I didn't call. I didn't warn them. I wanted to see their faces when I confronted them. Richard opened the door, looking unsurprised.
Emma.
I was going to call you after the board meeting. Were you? I pushed past him into the foyer. Were you going to explain how you stole my company out from under me? Or just issue more corporate restructuring notices? Mom appeared from the kitchen, her expression stricken. Emma, please calm down. Richard is trying to help. Help. My laugh sounded unhinged even to my own ears. He just took controlling interest in a company worth $75 million. That's not help. That's theft. Richard remained infuriatingly calm. The paperwork you signed was completely legal. Your mother witnessed it. You transferred your shares willingly. I didn't know what I was signing. That's unfortunate, he said, straightening his cuffs, but it doesn't change the reality of the situation. Eduratech needs experienced leadership to reach its potential. You're a brilliant developer, Emma, but running a company of this magnitude requires business acumen you simply don't have. And you do. I turned to my mother, who wouldn't meet my eyes. Did you know? When you brought those papers, did you know what they really were? Her silence was answer enough. Why? I asked, my voice breaking. That company is everything to me. My whole life's work. Mom finally looked up, tears streaming down her face. Richard said it was for the best. That you were in over your head. That we could all benefit if you betrayed me? The words hung in the air between us. Richard stepped forward. No one has betrayed you. You're still part of Eduratech. A crucial part. But now you can focus on what you do best, development, while I handle the business side. The condescension in his voice made something snap inside me. I stepped toward him, fists clenched. You planned this from the beginning, didn't you? That's why you married her. I gestured toward my mother. You saw a young, successful tech company and a founder with a close relationship to her newly divorced mother. The perfect mark. For just a moment, something cold and calculating flashed in his eyes before his mask of reasonableness returned. That's absurd. I love your mother. Emma, please, Mom begged. We can work this out as a family. I looked between them, the man who had stolen everything from me and the woman who had helped him do it, and made my decision. We are not a family, I said quietly. And this isn't over. I walked out, slamming the door behind me. In my car, I finally let the tears come, hot and furious. They had taken my company, but they had miscalculated badly on one crucial point. They thought I would give up. They were wrong. I didn't recognize the woman in the mirror. 3 weeks after losing Eduratech, I had dark circles under my eyes and a hollow look that scared even me. My apartment had transformed into a chaotic nest, empty takeout containers, unwashed clothes, and walls plastered with printouts of Eduroteca's code architecture. The rage had become my fuel. When sleep threatened, I remembered Richard's smug face. When doubt crept in, I recalled my mother's betrayal. The anger kept me going when nothing else could. My phone buzzed. Priya, my old roommate and one of Eduroteca's first employees. She'd quit the day after my ouster, along with a handful of loyal team members. "He's gutting the platform," she said without preamble. Richard stripped out all the accessibility features for special needs students. Says they're not cost-effective. My stomach churned. Those features had been inspired by my cousin Jamie, who had dyslexia. They weren't profitable, but they were essential. The heart of what Edurotec stood for. "That's not all," Priya continued. "He's hiking subscription prices by 60% and selling student data to third-party advertisers." I closed my eyes. The vision I'd had for Edurotec, an educational platform that served students first, that made learning accessible to everyone regardless of ability or background, was being systematically dismantled. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, though I already knew. "Because you need to do something," she said fiercely. "And because there are 8 of us meeting at Kai's place tonight. Former Edurotec people who want to help." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to crawl back into my pit of rage and self-pity. But a smaller, stronger voice whispered, "They're waiting for you to lead them." "Text me the address," I said. Kai's loft was industrial chic, exposed brick and pipes, long wooden tables that had once served as doors. 8 familiar faces looked up when I walked in. "My team. My people. The prodigal boss returns," joked Marcus, my former CFO. But his eyes were serious, assessing. "I'm not your boss anymore," I said, dropping my backpack on the table. "That's not what we heard," said Aiden, head of UI design. "Word is you're starting something new. Something better than Edurotec." I stared at him. "Where did you hear that?" "Tech blogs are speculating," said Priya. "Investors are watching. They know you won't stay down." "So it's true?" asked Lucia, our former legal counsel. "You're building a competitor?" I hadn't planned to, but standing there, seeing their expectant faces, I realized they needed more than vengeance. They needed hope. A path forward. Yes, I lied. Then, as the idea took shape in my mind, it became truth. Yes, I am. For the next hour, we talked strategy. Edurotec had first-mover advantage and brand recognition, but it also had Richard at the helm. Richard, who knew nothing about education technology, who saw only dollar signs. "We need a name," said Kai, whiteboard marker in hand. "Something that captures what we're doing." "Revolt," I said immediately. The word had been circling in my mind for weeks. Revolt AI. Eyebrows raised, but no one argued. It was perfect, both a statement of rebellion and a promise to revolutionize learning once more. By midnight, we had the beginnings of a business plan. Priya and Aiden would handle design. Marcus would work his financial magic for seed funding. Lucia would draft contracts that no one, not even Richard, could find loopholes in. And me, I would code. I would build a platform so advanced, so intuitive, that Edurotec would look like a prototype by comparison. "One more thing," I said as we prepared to leave. "No one breathes a word about this. As far as the world knows, I'm still nursing my wounds, and you're all looking for new jobs." They nodded solemnly. We were no longer just colleagues. We were conspirators. For the next 3 months, I barely saw daylight. Designing Revolt AI was like giving birth, painful, exhausting, but ultimately creating something extraordinary. I built on everything I'd learned from Edurotec, correcting old mistakes and incorporating new breakthroughs in machine learning. The core innovation was what I called the learning mesh, an algorithm that didn't just adapt to individual students, but created connections between them, facilitating peer-to-peer learning in ways Edurotec never could. It was elegant, powerful, and light years ahead of anything on the market. But there was something else. Something only I knew about. Late one night, as I implemented Revolt AI's security protocols, I found myself writing an additional subroutine. A digital backdoor of sorts, not into Revolt but into Edurotec. You see, when I built Eduroteca's original architecture, I'd included something programmers call an Easter egg, a hidden feature accessible only if you knew exactly where to look. It was common practice, a signature of sorts, and completely harmless unless you knew how to weaponize it. And I did. With a few strategic keystrokes, I created what hackers call a kill switch, a piece of code that could, when activated, cause Eduroteca's system to implode spectacularly. I told myself I wouldn't use it, that it was insurance, nothing more. But as reports filtered in about Richard's decimation of my platform, features cut, prices raised, educational integrity compromised, my resolve weakened. "We've got interest," Marcus announced one day, bursting into our makeshift headquarters. "3 angel investors want to meet. They've heard rumors." "We're not ready," I said, panicking. Revolt AI was revolutionary on paper, but the actual platform was only 70% complete. "We don't need to be ready," he countered. "We just need to be better than Edurotec. And from what I hear, that bar is getting lower by the day." He was right. Richard had managed to alienate educators, parents, and even his own development team in record time. The educational community was ripe for an alternative. The investors were impressed with our demo, but cautious. "What happens when Edurotec retaliates?" asked one, a shrewd woman with sharp eyes. "They have resources, market share, brand recognition." I smiled for the first time in months. "Edurotec has one critical weakness," I said, thinking of the kill switch hidden in my code. "Its leadership doesn't understand its own product." As we refined Revolt AI, I also began gathering intelligence on Eduroteca's operations. Not through illegal means, I didn't need to hack anything. I simply reached out to disgruntled employees who were all too happy to share Richard's mismanagement, unethical data practices, misleading investor reports, premium features that didn't work as advertised. I wasn't just building a better platform. I was assembling ammunition for war. A strange calm settled over me as I finalized my plans. 6 months after being ousted from Edurotec, I no longer resembled the broken woman I'd been. My apartment was clean, my mind clear, and my purpose absolute. Revolt AI was not just a product, it was a weapon aimed directly at Richard Hale's heart. "They've announced a major investor showcase," Priya said, sliding her laptop across the table to me. The invitation on screen was elegant, featuring Eduroteca's blue and silver logo. "Richard's unveiling Edurotec 2.0 next Friday. Every major education investor in the country will be there." I scrolled through the details, a cold smile forming. Perfect timing. "For what?" Kai asked, looking nervous. He'd been the most cautious of our group, constantly worried about legal repercussions. I closed the laptop. "For Revolt AI's soft launch." The team exchanged glances. "We're not ready for a launch," Marcus objected. "The platform needs at least 3 more weeks of testing, and marketing hasn't even." "Not a public launch," I clarified. "A targeted one. Just enough to create a stir in exactly the right circles." Later that night, alone in my apartment, I accessed the backdoor I'd built into Eduroteca's system. I wasn't there to sabotage, not yet. I was gathering intelligence, mapping out their current architecture to understand what Richard had changed. What I found infuriated me. He'd cut corners everywhere, security protocols relaxed, data verification steps eliminated, all to reduce server costs. Worse, he'd implemented aggressive tracking of student behavior, creating detailed profiles that would be valuable to advertisers, but violated every principle of educational privacy I'd built into the original platform. I downloaded evidence methodically, emails discussing these changes, code modifications, internal memos about monetization strategies. None of this was technically illegal. I had built the backdoor when Edurotec was mine, but it felt like justice. The kill switch would be even more satisfying. I designed it to activate during high traffic periods, causing increasingly catastrophic system failures that would appear random but would ultimately destroy the platform's credibility. All it would take was one command. My finger hovered over the key. Part of me, the part still raw with betrayal, wanted to press it immediately, to watch Richard's stolen empire crumble. But strategy demanded patience. The investor showcase would provide maximum impact. My phone rang, startling me.
"Mom,
She'd called weekly since our confrontation, leaving voicemails that evolved from defensive, "Richard really does know best," to pleading, "Please talk to me, Emma." I let it go to voicemail as usual, but this time I listened to her message. "Emma, I know you probably won't hear this, but I need to tell you." Her voice sounded different, tired, strained. "Richard is taking EduraTech public. The IPO filing happens after next week's showcase. He says it's what's best for the company, but..." A long pause. "I miss you. I made a terrible mistake. Please call me." I deleted the message, but her words lingered. An IPO would make Richard untouchable, wealthy beyond imagination off my innovation, my work. The timeline had just accelerated. The next morning, I called an emergency meeting with my team. Change of plans. We launch Revolt AI the day before EduraTech's showcase. I outline my strategy rapidly. We target 3 key school districts that are EduraTech's biggest clients. Offer them free pilots, premium features, the works. Then we leak news of their switch to the tech press. "That's aggressive," Lucia warned. "Richard could sue for interference." "Let him try," I countered. "By the time his lawyers draft a complaint, his company will be in free fall." For the next 4 days, we worked around the clock. While the team prepared for our targeted launch, I refined my final attack. The kill switch would be elegant in its devastation, first degrading EduraTech's performance during the showcase, then corrupting data in real time, and finally exposing the privacy violations Richard had implemented. The night before our launch, an unexpected visitor knocked on my door. My mother stood in the hallway, looking thinner and older than I remembered. "5 minutes," she said when I started to close the door. "Please, Emma." Against my better judgment, I let her in. "Richard doesn't know I'm here," she began, perching awkwardly on my couch. "He thinks I'm visiting Aunt Claire." "What do you want?" My voice was flat, emotionless. "To warn you." She twisted her wedding ring nervously. "Richard knows you're planning something. He has lawyers preparing cease and desist orders against anyone associated with your new company. He's watching your former employees, monitoring their communications." My pulse quickened. "How does he know about Revolt AI?" "He has sources everywhere. And She hesitated. "He's not who I thought he was. The things he's done to EduraTech, the corners he's cut, it's not what you built. You're just realizing this now?" The bitterness in my laugh surprised even me. Tears filled her eyes. "I thought I was helping you. He convinced me you were in over your head, that the company would fail without experienced leadership. I believed him because I was afraid for you, working yourself to exhaustion." She looked up, her face naked with regret. "I didn't read the papers either, Emma. I just trusted him." The revelation should have changed everything, but it was too late. The wheels were already in motion. "You should go," I said quietly. "What I'm about to do can't be stopped." "What are you going to do?" Alarm filled her eyes. I showed her to the door without answering. As she left, she turned back one last time. "Be careful, Emma. Richard is dangerous when cornered." I nodded, closing the door on her worried face. Her warning came too late to save our relationship, but it did reinforce my resolve. Richard was watching us, which meant I needed to be even more careful. That night, I made the final preparations for my digital assault. By morning, Revolt AI would begin its targeted launch. And by the time Richard took the stage for his investor showcase, the kill switch would be primed and waiting. EduraTech was about to implode, and I would be there to watch it burn. The morning of Richard's big investor showcase dawned clear and bright, a perfect California day for a corporate implosion. I dressed carefully in a charcoal suit that conveyed both professionalism and funeral-appropriate solemnity. Today I would bury EduraTech as Richard had reimagined it, and I wanted to look the part. "Are you sure about this?" Priya asked, handing me a sleek tablet containing the kill switch activation protocol. Her eyes reflected concern, not for what we were about to do, but for me. "Absolutely," I replied, slipping the tablet into my bag. "Did the district superintendents respond?" She nodded. All 3 confirmed the pilot program. They're implementing Revolt AI in select classrooms this morning. And the press. TechCrunch and EdSurge have both picked up the story. It'll hit social media within the hour. Phase 1 was underway. By the time Richard took the stage, influential educators would already be buzzing about a mysterious new platform outperforming EduroTech. But that was just the appetizer. The San Francisco Convention Center's Grand Hall was transformed for the showcase. Blue lighting, interactive demos around the perimeter, and a stage dominated by a massive screen. I slipped in with the crowd of investors, educators, and tech journalists, keeping my head down. Richard wouldn't expect me here, in the belly of the beast. I spotted my mother immediately. She sat in the front row, elegant in navy blue, her expression strained despite her smile. Beside her was a man I recognized as EduroTech's new CTO, my replacement, brought in to give technical credibility to Richard's hollow promises. The lights dimmed. A video began playing, students and teachers praising EduroTech, interspersed with graphics showing improved test scores and engagement metrics. My metrics, my success stories, stolen and repackaged. Richard emerged to enthusiastic applause, the perfect picture of tech leadership in his designer suit and practiced humility. Education is broken, he began, his voice carrying across the hushed room. But today, EduroTech 2.0 fixes it completely. As he launched into his presentation, I found a secluded corner and removed my tablet. The backdoor into EduroTech's system accepted my credentials without hesitation. While Richard demonstrated flashy new features and promised revolutionary results, I executed the first command. On stage, Richard's demo stuttered briefly, a minor glitch that he smoothed over with a joke. But it was just the beginning. The second command targeted EduroTech's data processing. As Richard attempted to show real-time student progress tracking, numbers began fluctuating wildly, percentages jumping from 20% to 90% and back again. Minor server issue, he said, his smile tightening. Let's move on to the personalized learning module. But the personalized module refused to load, displaying instead an error message. Student privacy protocols violated. Access denied. Murmurs spread through the audience. Investors exchanged glances. Richard's composure cracked slightly as he signaled frantically to his technical team offstage. Time for the final blow. I executed the command that would expose Richard's betrayal of EduroTech's core mission. The massive screen behind him suddenly filled with internal emails and code snippets I'd collected, evidence of corner cutting, security breaches, and unethical data collection. As you can see, Richard continued desperately, unaware of what was displayed behind him. EduroTech 2.0 represents the future of... Mr. Hale, interrupted a woman in the third row. Could you explain why your platform is collecting and selling detailed behavioral profiles of students as young as 7? Richard turned, finally seeing the damning evidence projected for all to witness. His face drained of color. In that moment, I stood. Perhaps I could explain, I said, my voice carrying in the suddenly silent room. Heads turned. Recognition dawned on faces. Richard's eyes found mine, his expression morphing from shock to fury. Emma Caldwell. I introduced myself, walking slowly toward the stage. Founder of EduroTech. I built this platform to democratize education, to make quality learning accessible to all students regardless of background or ability. That vision has been corrupted. This is a publicity stunt. Richard sputtered into his microphone. Security, remove her. But no one moved. The evidence behind him spoke volumes, and my reputation in the education technology community still carried weight. What you're witnessing isn't a hack, I continued, addressing the audience directly. It's the platform itself rejecting changes that compromise its integrity. EduroTech was designed with ethical guardrails that Mr. Hale has systematically dismantled for profit. My mother stood, her face torn between horror and a strange pride. Our eyes met briefly before she turned to Richard. Is it true? She asked, her voice cutting through the chaos. Did you know about the data collection from children? His silence was damning. An investor rose from his seat. I think we've seen enough. Our firm will be reconsidering our position. Others followed suit, some leaving immediately, others gathering in concerned clusters. Journalists typed frantically on their phones. The showcase was imploding spectacularly. And then, as if the universe had a flair for timing, phones around the room began buzzing with notifications. The news about Revolt AI had broken, featuring glowing early reviews from the 3 school districts that had been Edurotech's cornerstone clients. Richard lunged toward me, his careful facade completely shattered. "You did this," he hissed, grabbing my arm. "You've destroyed everything." I removed his hand calmly. "No, Richard. You destroyed it yourself when you valued profit over purpose." Security finally arrived, but not to remove me, to escort Richard from the stage as questions about data security and legal compliance erupted from the audience. My mother approached through the chaos, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I swear I didn't know what he was doing." I believed her, but belief wasn't forgiveness. "It's over," I said simply. Edurotech as he rebuilt it is finished. As we stood in the wreckage of Richard's ambitions, my phone buzzed. "Marcus, you might want to see this," he said when I answered. "Revolt AI just crashed our servers. We've had 5,000 signups in the last 15 minutes. Schools are abandoning Edurotech in droves." I smiled, watching Richard being led away, his empire crumbling in real time. "So it begins," I said quietly. 3 months after the Edurotech Showcase disaster, I stood in Revolt AI's new headquarters, a converted warehouse with exposed brick, floor-to-ceiling windows, and enough space for our rapidly expanding team. The morning sun streamed through skylights, illuminating workstations where developers, educators, and designers collaborated with an energy I remembered well from Edurotech's early days. The aftermath of Richard's downfall had been swift and merciless. Edurotech's stock plummeted before it could even go public. Investors pulled out en masse. A class action lawsuit was filed by parents over the unauthorized data collection, and Richard himself faced SEC investigations into misleading business practices. He'd lost everything: his reputation, his stolen company, and ultimately my mother. Their divorce proceedings had begun last month. I hadn't spoken to Mom since the showcase. She'd called, texted, even sent handwritten letters expressing remorse and begging forgiveness. Each time, I'd felt the wall around my heart solidify rather than crack. Some betrayals cut too deep for simple reconciliation. "The Madison School District contract is final," announced Marcus, interrupting my thoughts as he entered my office. "That's our 15th major district this quarter." I smiled, taking the folder he offered. "And Edurotech?" "Down to 8% market share and falling. They're looking for a buyer, but no one's biting." He hesitated. "There are rumors they might approach us." The irony wasn't lost on me. "Not interested," I figured. He gestured toward the main floor. "The team's waiting for your speech. Quarterly kickoff meeting." I'd almost forgotten. As I followed Marcus toward the gathering crowd, a notification lit up my phone. "Mom again. I'm outside your building. Please, 5 minutes." That's all I ask. My finger hovered over the delete button, but something stopped me. Perhaps it was the success surrounding me, or the knowledge that holding on to rage took energy I now wanted to direct elsewhere. Whatever the reason, I texted back. "After my meeting. Coffee shop across the street. 10:30. Priya introduced me to enthusiastic applause. Standing before my team, now 80 strong and growing, I felt a sense of déjà vu, but with crucial differences. This time, I was wiser. This time, I had built safeguards into both the company and myself. 3 months ago, Revolt AI was an idea born from betrayal. I began. Today, we're the fastest growing educational technology platform in the country. The crowd cheered, but I raised my hand for quiet. Success is gratifying, but it's not why we're here. We're here because we believe education should be accessible, ethical, and transformative. Because we know technology can elevate learning without compromising privacy or principles." Faces nodded in agreement, many of them former Edurotech employees who had joined Revolt AI after Richard's fall. Our learning mesh has revolutionized collaborative education. Our accessibility features have opened doors for students previously left behind. And our transparent data policies have set new industry standards. I paused, looking around at the community we'd built. But we're just getting started. Today, I'm announcing the Revolt Foundation, a nonprofit arm dedicated to bringing our platform to underserved communities at no cost. 20% of our profits will fund this initiative. The announcement was met with thunderous approval. This was what EduraTech should have been: technology with purpose, innovation with integrity. As the meeting concluded and people returned to work, I slipped out to meet my mother. She sat by the window, looking smaller somehow, diminished. When she saw me, her eyes filled with tears, but she composed herself quickly. "Thank you for coming," she said as I took the seat across from her. I nodded, waiting. "I've been following Revolt AI's success," she continued, her hands wrapped tightly around her coffee cup. "It's everything EduraTech should have been. I'm proud of you, Emma." "What do you want, Mom?" My voice wasn't harsh, just tired.
To apologize. Properly.
Not for excuses or forgiveness, but because you deserve to hear it. She met my eyes directly. "I betrayed your trust. I let Richard manipulate me because I was afraid. Afraid you were working too hard. Afraid you'd burn out. Afraid I couldn't help you." He offered solutions that seemed reasonable at the time, and I didn't question them enough. Her honesty was unexpected. I'd prepared for defensiveness, for emotional appeals, not this straightforward accountability. "The divorce is final next month," she continued. "I'm moving to Oregon to be near Aunt Claire. But before I go, I wanted you to know that losing your respect has been the greatest regret of my life. And seeing you rise again, stronger than before." Her voice broke. "It's been my greatest pride." Something shifted inside me. Not forgiveness yet, but perhaps its precursor. The beginning of letting go. "I'm not ready for us to be close again," I said honestly. "I don't know if I ever will be."
She nodded, accepting this.
"I understand. I just needed you to know how sorry I am and how very proud." When we parted, there was no dramatic reconciliation, no tearful embrace. Just a quiet acknowledgement that some bonds remain even when stretched beyond recognition. Back at headquarters, I found Kai waiting in my office with news. A school in rural Alabama had implemented Revolt AI and seen reading scores improve by 30% in disadvantaged students. This was why I'd built EduraTech initially. This was why I'd fought to create Revolt AI from its ashes. Not for revenge, though that had been sweet, but for impact. That evening, as the office emptied and sunset painted the sky in fierce oranges and pinks, I stood at the window reflecting on the journey. I had lost everything. My company, my relationship with my mother, my naivete. But from that loss had emerged something stronger, something truer to my original vision. Richard had taught me an unintended lesson. Success means nothing if you compromise your principles to achieve it. I had built an empire once. They stole it. So I built something better. And this time, it truly was mine.